So what we're going to be talking about today is Dabrowski's interest in the gifted. I'm wondering how many of you in this group are interested in, involved in, and have worked with gifted children. This is what brings you to this conference. And how many of you learned about the theory through gifted literature? We're exposed to it through gifted education. And I'm also wondering, are there people, and please, if you don't raise your hand, then the entire purpose of this presentation is lost. Are there people here who really have wondered if TPD should be applied to the gifted, or if that's perhaps not the best use of the theory, that it's inappropriate to be used with the gifted? Yeah, okay, so that has been a running theme in the work that we've done with the theory since 1980. I feel like this theory has been a true gift in my life. Not just professionally, but also personally. I do use the theory as a gauge of my own development. I take it very seriously. It's my guide. It's my spiritual guide to becoming a better person. And I do beat myself up. One Sal said that too, you know. He said, I'm just starting level 3. Sal, I'm not even sure where that is, you know. There's a lot of level 4s and 5s around this room. I'm not one of them. So, clicker.
Now we finally have it all work.
Thank you. Oh, all those pretty fonts are gone. So that's okay, we did this already. So, this book, this precious, wonderful book, has been a spur. A spur does not a spur like hurting, but a burr. But this has been a critical element in all of our thinking. And all of us have gone back to mental growth many, many times. And when I started this presentation, what did I do? Found my copy of Mental Growth. And I'm going to read a lot of these because it's Dabrowski's words, and much of it, and I don't want to mess that up. But in Mental Growth Through Positive Disintegration, Dabrowski describes psychiatric examinations he conducted in Warsaw in which 85% of the subjects had IQs between 120 and 150. And you've heard, if you were here for the 101, the initial presentation from Lori Nixon, that IQ was very important. What you learned from Bill is that he used the Wechsler adult scale. So he did give and believe in the value of IQ tests. He said that those subjects displayed symptoms of mild anxiety, depression, phobias, inhibitions, and, quote, various forms of overexcitability. He recognized that the great majority of highly gifted children, youth, and adults show very strong and very clear psychoneurotic symptoms. Now, this has made a lot of people in gifted land very uncomfortable. Nobody wants gifted kids seen as psychoneurotic. And it has also led to a huge backlash against our theory within the field, which I will be sharing with you, the latest attack against us. And it's because of the terminology and the belief that all gifted kids are maladjusted or psychoneurotic if they adopt this theory. So there's a lot of people saying, don't go anywhere near this theory. But for Dabrowski, that was the highest form of compliment. You're a psychoneurotic. Because, and that's the beauty that Sal was trying to explain at the beginning. He took words that had different meanings for the populace, put his own spin on them, which were usually paradoxical, opposite of what people would normally think, and made them good things, developmentally positive things. So in mental growth, at the end, there's a glossary. And psychoneuroses are defined as syndromes of the processes of positive disintegration. So don't get any knee-jerk reaction when you hear all this psychoneurotic stuff, because it means the opposite of what you're thinking it means. It means that the person has the seeds of higher moral development. The more accelerated is mental development, the more universally gifted is the individual. The more positive psychoneurotic symptoms he exhibits, the more there is likelihood that his disintegration will take a global character. Highly talented individuals and individuals of genius show at the stages of multi-level disintegration and secondary integration a distinct presence of the instinct for self-perfection. That has had a monumental effect on my philosophy. In gifted education, it is camp to say perfectionism is bad, striving for excellence is good. And I've used the Dabrowskian perspective on perfectionism as the striving for self-perfection, which is an ideal and a goal to be cherished. Several quotations of mental growth throughout positive disintegration correlate high levels of intelligence with accelerated development. Dabrowski discussed high, average, and low intelligence. Among the so-called normal people who possess average intelligence, he believed that there was less developmental potential. Now enter my new friend, my old friend, who will, I'm sure, become my forever friend, Paul McGaffey, who I was introduced to through Susan Picard. And Paul McGaffey worked with Marlene Rankel and Dabrowski from 1967 to 1973. And Marlene gave Paul a series of grant proposals that she and Dabrowski developed between 1968 and 1970 to substantiate the theory empirically. These were never funded. They, when Paul was leaving Grand Prairie to move to Lethbridge, he gave them to Susan, and Susan invited me to Grand Prairie and gave them to me to look at. My mouth went to the floor. I was so stunned by this set of proposals. In these projects, Dabrowski sought to establish the relationship of levels of intelligence with constructs in TPD. He frequently mentioned children of superior intelligence compared with children of average and below average intelligence. So I'm going to give you some quotes from these proposals. And these are why I believe the proposals, these primary source documents, are so vital. Number one, they document Dabrowski's interest in the gifted. Unquestionable interest in the gifted. Number two, his belief that individuals of high intelligence are more likely to exhibit the dynamisms and the overexcitabilities. Number three, his desire to empirically prove the tenets of the theory by studying the gifted. And this is one of them. I'm just going to give a few excerpts. Partial project number 4, in many gifted children and adults, we observe manifestations of so-called emotional maturity. There exists a need to obtain more complete and scientifically gathered data relating to emotional immaturity and its positive and creative role in psychic development. We observe 2 types of behavior in gifted children. This is my favorite. This is the one I want to start with, this Project 5. Number 1, very stable, uniform attitudes towards schoolwork and other obligations. And those are your high-achieving, good students, never in trouble, and who end up writing articles for Gifted Child Quarterly. Number 2, variable attitudes towards schoolwork and other obligations with a consequent fluctuation in their performance. These are the underachievers the quirky kids, the creative kids, the twice exceptional kids, the kids that grew up to be you. Because why else would you be at this conference? You aren't the straight and narrow because this conference isn't about the mainstream. This conference is about people who feel and see the world differently. That's why you are all here. And so this is a theory about you, and it's a theory about how to cherish the children that you are attached to and work with and care about. We hypothesize, Dabrowski says, that the second group is superior. Now, he means superior in their developmental potential, in their potential for higher level development. The foregoing is founded upon our belief that the unstable gifted child possesses a strong emotional component and deep sensitivity. And while these traits may be necessary for creativity of the highest caliber, they function as a barrier to consistent, well-regulated output of effort. That is older. Project 6, investigation of the nature and frequency of psychoneurosis in children and adolescents of different mental abilities, highly gifted, normal, mentally deficient without brain damage. Partial project number 6 continues. This is the thesis. On the basis of our clinical observations and preliminary experimental study, which means more than one, there appears to exist a strong positive correlation between the high degree of general or special aptitudes in psychoneurosis. Also, there appears to be an exceedingly low occurrence of psychoneurotic traits in mentally retarded individuals. And the same statement is made in mental growth. In fact, many times. The nature of the relationship between psychoneurosis and mental ability is of great significance for education, classification of psychopathology, and the social culture in general. Project number 7, investigation of the inner psychic milieu, which he describes as dynamisms, of adolescents and adults in the following groups: the highly gifted and talented, those possessing average aptitudes, psychoneurotics, mentally deficient without brain damage. And I'm not exactly sure what the citation is, so if someone can find the citation for this in Dabrowski's work, I'd be very grateful. But this has been a critical phrase that I've used over and over again. The growth and evolution of civilization and culture creates more complex problems, which can only be handled by people with a correspondingly advanced level of psychic complexity. That's a powerful statement. And it links to the field of the study of the gifted. And Ellen Fiedler, in her new book, Bright Adults, if you don't have this book, do not pass go, do not collect $200. Contact Ellen. Ellen says, giftedness is characterized by more intensity and complexity. Complexity existed before Dabrowski's theory entered the field of gifted education. Intensity is Dabrowski's and all of the Dabrowski advocates' contribution to giftedness, recognizing that intensity. And in 1993, I wrote a book, Counseling the Gifted and Talented, and this is what I said, based on the study of Dabrowski's theory. Cognitive complexity gives rise to emotional depth and sensitivity. Thus, the gifted not only think differently from their peers, they also feel differently. So, this is my contribution. I'm going to turn this over to Paul, who's going to tell you more about Marlene.
Maybe you still have 2 minutes.
So, I'm going to take them at the end.
You want the mic?
Oh, the mic.
I'll use this.
Okay.
attorney one call. There you go.
Thank you, Dr. Frank. How many people here have met Marlene Rankel? Okay. Good to see. Marlene's an important person in my life. Also one of the most puzzling people I've ever met. So, Marlene, those are your grandkids?
They are. Struck me the corner.
He's not a slide projector person. Would you do his slides or?
You want me to just what?
Yeah, why don't you, you
Sure,
just nod your head. So the question on the next slide is, who is Marlene Rankel?
So, my wife said that Marlene would always say something to build me up.
Back one.
Sorry.
If you know Marlene, that's a really startling gift. Turns out she gave that to everybody. Marlene had the gift of seeing others' strengths before they knew it themselves. And both those statements can be made about Dr. Dabrowski. And such gift-giving is rare. It takes a person who is full in a sense that fits Dabrowski's theory of positive disintegration. Few people possess that compassion, that full compassion, to attend to other people enough to truly build them up. And I was a beneficiary of those gifts from Marlene Rankel and Dr. Dabrowski. And I was happy to see Bill giving a gift like that to a participant in this Congress on Thursday evening. So that gift giving is alive and well. These gifts, however, were kind of puzzling. And most of you all recognize this, that the insight that came with the gift was empty of content. You feel good, and you don't know why you feel good. And that's something that Susan mentioned, that the people who are here are touched by the theory of positive disintegration in such a way that they are transformed. What we're talking about today, Linda and myself and Frank, is that it needs to go beyond our personal transformation to do something to bring peace in the world. And Marlene Rankel saw Dabrowski, saw the people of the world like Dabrowski. They had a similar wordless vision of the world and the people in it. Wordless. Why do I use that word when Dabrowski wrote thousands and thousands and thousands of words in several languages? Dabrowski's theory is so important and so surprising because it's bereft of behavioral terminology, almost. It's innocent of measurement, even given what Bill was saying the other day. Measurement is not a strong point in Dabrowski's work. So many of you are stymied, and if you're not stymied in an honest kind of way, then you're disagreeing wildly with other people in the room. Marlene was important to Dr. Dabrowski because she was able to transcend the culture of normative measurements. With Dr. Dabrowski's help, she wrote a dissertation in 1975. And it was a dissertation that examined in a very courageous way the positive disintegration of a 13-year-old boy, and used qualitative measurement in order to earn a PhD. Not an easy thing to do at the time. I believe that it inspired Dr. Dabrowski. Marlene's efforts to make Dabrowski's theory accessible for those who wanted to use the theory required. She worked hard and softly to dig the theory out of the preservationists' hands. Those were her words. And to apply it to the study of extraordinary people, especially children. Only her confidants heard her distress about what she saw as a frustrating lack of the long view on the part of a lot of the people around Dabrowski. Dabrowski was a radical, and I saw him as needing to camouflage that radicalism, considering the political chaos from which he emerged. I can appreciate that. I saw him as a twinkling leprechaun persona. When he was frustrated, he turned to his faith, his music, and his creative artistry. Marlene's camouflage was her ingrained politeness, her seamless, I'm not going to disturb you, even though inside she was disintegrating and using a lot of energy, which then she healed herself by putting that energy into music, her small cadre of guardian friends, and ice cream. So, Marlene was a wordsmith. She suffered a little bit of paucity of words. So when she spoke, it was usually in one-liners, or else she was highly prepared. And her one-liners included things like, your gifts are to be given away. If not, you will be reclaimed. I know something so deep and profound that I can't express it in words. That's the truth. Some use words to plant thorns on roses. Women are revolting. I have a love affair with life. It seduces me daily. Marlene depended on evidence, and she used that evidence to then move to the next step. And she spent all of her time with Dr. Dabrowski gently and persistently trying to convert him to that, which he considered a very North American view. Like stop measuring everything. However, what we're talking about here is is that this is an essential step that needs to be taken right now before we die on the vine. When Dabrowski encountered me on a crisp, sunny campus street in 1967 and asked me to be his associate, I was gobsmacked. I had attended every lecture, every seminar since he arrived on campus, and here he was approaching me, and I immediately after I was done my shock, I felt great about myself. I thought I was elevated. Then I looked around, and it turns out that he did that for everybody that he met. Just as we saw at the beginning, that Marlene did that for people. Dabrowski pointed me towards a real world of acceptable deviance. This is the world that I lived in. I was an actor on stage. I was married to someone who was willing to be married to me. Very deviant. And the productive people that I worked with and that I loved were all weird. And this is something I kept hidden. I tried to keep myself hidden. And Dabrowski said, take the mask off. You're good. And that was coming at a time when the university was pushing the normative imperative on me, full-time, seamless. This is the way the world is. The world is made up of norms, personality theories based on norms. And I was stunned. I was in the PhD program and being asked to use this stuff for doing research. And the world that I was in was not a world in which norms operated at all. And I didn't know what was happening. Dr. Dabrowski and Marlene, who filtered Dr. Dabrowski for me, they pointed out that I was in the real world, and the other world was bizarrely distorted. So here it was Dabrowski and Marlene. Marlene was clearly living the theory of positive disintegration in a way that I was keenly aware of and pained by. And yet she was a very attractive person. And the experience showed me that a high-level life contains much darkness and much being beholden to others. No radical independence. And this was in a university that was teaching autonomy as a lifestyle. Instead, there is compromise, heightened awareness of others' point of view, excited listening, and much touching. And this in the context of being told that my engagement with the patient needed to be at arm's length. And if you've seen Dr. Dabrowski's video that PJ Reich did called Greetings, Psychoneurotics. It's on YouTube. Please watch it if you haven't. in there, it's introduced by Dabrowski meeting and assessing Peter. Is that right, Bill? And he's touching Peter constantly in that initial encounter. Marlene touched the gifted children that she worked with. There was no pretense at therapeutic distance. Dabrowski was a brilliant psychotherapist, and yet for those of us who were studying with him, his psychotherapy we could only see through a glass darkly. When we asked him, how do you do that? What are you learning from those touches? When you scratch someone's chest, what's going on? Because it was very clear from what he said and from our observations that his psychotherapy depended on that assessment. It wasn't a casual kind of a thing that taught at many of the universities, what's wrong with this person? This was engagement. And touching someone is a very risky engagement. And yet, Dabrowski and Marlene touched their patients often. Marlene struggled to engage with Dabrowski's words and struggled to make them more poetic and reachable. By reachable, she meant measurable, testable. And testable meaning accommodating the needs of North American readers, North American sensibilities, North American researchers. And this is a paradox that even Dabrowski perhaps resisted. He found it foreign. And I looked at Dabrowski's life as a social psychologist, and I saw that he came from a culture in which verbal uniqueness was important enough that his writing shows that style. Not accessible so much as special, poetic, unique. And Marlene fought long and hard to convince him to go in that direction. And Multi-Levelness of Instinctive and Emotional Functions, Volume 2, illustrates the success of her work, and it's one of the few works unpublished that has her name on the front, along with Dabrowski and McGaffey. In this, Dabrowski made very appreciative comments of how much Marlene had done in the production of this two-volume work, and by extension, all of the work that she had done. She wrote much of this, along with Dexter Ammon, and her name appears in small type. That always astonished me and pissed me off. It didn't bother her, according to what she said to me and her close friends. This did not depress her, that she was put on a second level. She understood that that was a European standard. Whether or not she was right, she was contributing tremendously. Her life appears as the biography that is Dabrowski's example of multi-level disintegration, accelerated development, advanced level 3. That's Marlene in this book. quote. So, later on today, I'll talk about why this material is up here, and I'd like to get some help from those of you who are here to develop an archive of Marlene's work, because I think it's an important lens to look into Dabrowski's work and this transition towards more activity using the theory. Let us be progeny, offspring of Dr. Dabrowski. Not just amplifiers of his work. Let's all of us be joyfully conflicted, not conflicted under the surface, which is what I see happening. Overexcited emotionally and move forward rather than sculpting the past. Meaning, let's get together and continue the work that I saw Marlene dedicating her life to. Focus on how the theory of positive disintegration transformed those of us who adored the theory, and disintegrate the comfort of some who believe TPD is valuable only in itself. Marlene wrote, "Development is in dynamic interaction with the world and can be appreciated fully only in action and not in static form." Thank you.
Well, there's 2 more slides.
This certainly ties in with the reason why Dabrowski used Gandhi as an example of level 5, and ties in with our theme that we have to begin with the children. Those of us who are adults, whether we brought children or not, they are the source of energy for the theory of positive disintegration. Let's be a living force rather than sitting around and chatting in these comfortable groups of lovely folks, and transform education and mental health practice.
We have a little technological problem. Can we get this expanded so that you see the whole screen? Oh, maybe it's there.
It's called presentation mode.
That's my journal.
Yep.
On now? I think a theme that I've been hearing a lot about is that the research that's been going on in this realm has failed to actually address the theory. So we have a lot of research out there on, for example, overexcitabilities, but it doesn't relate to the theory. In 1970, Dabrowski provided a general hypothesis concerning mental development and mental growth. These hypotheses should really be called empirical generalizations, since they lack specific measurement. And at that time, Dabrowski thought they were best tested through individual case studies. In 1997, along with Jeanette Manzanero, and Nancy Miller, I attempted to test one of these generalizations, namely that creative individuals in general, and those created in the arts and humanities in particular, show above average, enduring, and even growing components of animistic, intuitive, and emotional thinking. Those are his kinds of words. To test this generalization, we had to assume that imaginational, intellectual, and emotional overexcitabilities were reasonable estimates of animistic and intuitive and emotional thinking. We found scores on imaginational and intellectual emotional OE were higher in artists in both countries, namely the United States and in
Venezuela. Venezuela.
Venezuela.
Venezuela. Thank you. Let's see where I am. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. My notes are tied to the slides, but then, so I'm working with the technology here. We concluded that there was cross-cultural validation of Dabrowski's empirical generalization, and therefore our research supported his theory.
That's the next slide.
No? Warner, in 2011, found that opera singers and professional dancers were higher on imaginational, intellectual, emotional, and sensual OEs, higher than athletes. Similar writings were reported by Thompson and Jacques in 2016, with dancers higher on psychomotor overexcitability than singers, but both were higher than athletes on sensual, imaginational, intellectual, and emotional. The problem here is that while confirming our earlier findings, these authors make no reference at all to Dabrowski's general theory. They just report about overexcitabilities. So, what kind of contribution is that to the theory? It's not. And I think that's a problem. Now, we have specific proposals that were created by Dabrowski and Marlene. 8 of those, 8 of the 10, were specifically referenced the study of overexcitabilities. And secondly, rather than simply studying single individuals, Dabrowski proposed examining specific samples of individuals in the plural. This is a major change in direction, because in the past, he was mostly interested in individual case studies. An important conclusion for me is that these proposals demonstrate a growth in Dabrowski himself, moving from a clinical approach to a broader empirical research approach. It also demonstrated his wish to examine the theory with research. One final, the findings to implement these research proposals, we'll be able to directly test the theory and his notions about what should be there. And the institute that I'm involved with, our part of our whole system is to promote the theory and examine these kinds of hypotheses. Now, it's not just for us to do this. These hypotheses are clearly available and are exactly what we should be using for graduate students. So there are opportunities here for people to do master's theses and PhD dissertations. And I'd like to see that happen, and I'm more than willing to help anybody that wants to get involved and actually conduct the research. One last thing. Overexcitabilities are best thought of as measures of personality. They are not, there's just one simple way of thinking about and measuring personality. And so we can change the general axiom of Dabrowski's theory to suggest that personality is what influences mental growth. The point of this is well taken in Sheila Gallagher's work, in which the Big Five theory, which supports the existence of OEs and gifted, shows that it is the relationship to the concept of openness experience that all of the overexcitabilities relate to. And recent research by, let's see if that's there. I didn't expect that one to be there. By Luke Krisch and Kerr, I think I'm saying that almost right, as demonstrating this empirically. So not only do we have the theoretical justification, we also have the empirical confirmation. And then finally, what Sheila has said, and here are references if anyone wants to be available.
Sheila Gallagher's chapter in Off the Charts is magnificent. It compared, I know there's a lot of Myers-Briggs people in here. How many of you love the MBTI? There's been studies comparing that to Dabrowski's theory. And she compares the Big Five theory of personality. How many of you are familiar with that? To the Myers-Briggs and to Dabrowski's theory, and shows the overlaps and provides firm confirmation of the overexcitabilities through this massive amount of research on the Big Five theory. And she says it is openness to experience that relates the most to giftedness. Now, Frank mentioned this article that just came out, and he put it in a positive context, and so did Michael Piofsky. Frank says, this article, how many of you know what I'm talking about, openness to experience and gifted child quarterly? Many people in gifted education read this journal, take it very seriously. And this particular article is a massive research study that supports the existence of the overexcitabilities through research on the Big Five theory. And even though it attacks the theory rather viciously, Michael says, hey, we're in the dialogue. We're not being ignored. You know, Terry said in Winnipeg, 2 people had heard of Dabrowski's theory. At least, even though they're fighting with us, 5 people? No, so even though they're fighting with us, they're acknowledging that we exist. But I'm not so happy. There are comments in here that are deeply upsetting to me. And the assumption of the writers are that there is no need for Dabrowski's theory. That all of the overexcitabilities can be subsumed under openness to experience, Openness to experience is one of the factors in the Big Five theory that is generally accepted internationally, massive studies, it's parsimonious. This theory is too complicated, why bother? But it also says that this theory is dangerous. And the danger is so interesting to me because the danger is the moral component of Dabrowski's theory. OEs have a place in a theory, TPD, which has insufficient empirical support. That is, the citations for that come from within our group. When reading about OEs, parents and practitioners can gravitate toward the theory and make assumptions that go beyond the description of openness or OE-related behaviors. Such a leap is dangerous as it might present individuals who are open to experience as more moral, following the original tenets of TPD. And then Dabrowski is quoted in Personality Shapers. An assumption not rooted in science. The leap becomes even more dangerous when OE is presented as an identification tool for gifted, when studies have consistently shown that intelligence and openness have correlations that are 0.20 to 0.40. That's not what Sheila Gellner found. She found much larger correlations. But the point of this is there's one place where Dabrowski's theory had hoped to find a home and an opportunity to continue. And it's being challenged by mainstream gifted education as inappropriate. The OEs sound too much like maladjustment. They don't get that you can use these terms paradoxically. That's a pretty high-level concept anyway, paradox. Not everybody gets paradox. So when we're divisive inside our small group, we're quoted to prove that we should not exist at all, that we don't add anything to gifted education. We can be subsumed by Big Five, which is more popular. We're a small band of merry people. And we're destroying ourselves. I would hope that we can move forward in peace and in harmony and in compromise, following not the tenets of the theory, but the model of the people and how Dabrowski related to people, how Marlene related to people, the cherishing that they gave to everyone that they met. I am here with a personal confession. I've been holding guilt for 2 years at having attacked a presenter at the last conference. I've been feeling very ashamed of my behavior. This has not been a safe place for people who are exploring how the theory fits with their own ideas and their own theories. And I apologize to anyone that I have offended in this conference with my critical judgment. I can't turn that part of my brain off that says, no, you've got it wrong. That's not it. No, that doesn't help. We all need to be cherished. That's the gift that Dabrowski gave to us. That's the gift that Marlene Rankel gave in every interaction that she had with people. I think we've needed for a long time to come together, to collaborate, to support and promote each other. Now is the time. We are dwindling. If someone doesn't come to the plate to say, yes, I'll do the next conference, there won't be a next conference.
There will be a next conference.
Will be.
There will be a next conference.
And if we don't collaborate and support each other and make this conference a safe place for people to explore new ideas, even if they're wrong-headed. And certainly I've had enough wrong-headed ideas about the theory myself. But it's part of the exploration and growth.
The only way that's going to advance is with graduate students. You young people that are here are the next group to take charge. Us old folks are going to die off.
Yeah, we're not spring chickens here. I'm 75 years old. And what you're looking at is psychomotor overexcitability, folks. That's what keeps me going. Almost. I just want and pray with every fiber of my being that we will bring together not the constructs, not the concepts, but the heart of this precious theory. Keep it alive, help it to survive, and bring it to the world for other people to be able to cherish. Thank you.
I told you how great she is. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that presentation very, very much. I agree with everything you said, and I believe that we must move forward. And as you said, the heart needs to inform the mind in this area. And sometimes we get too caught up in the thinking, and we don't emphasize the relationships and the feeling. Thank you very much.
Mea culpa.
I'm going to make a suggestion or a comment about Marlene. Marlene made a huge contribution that is yet unrealized. She was kind of 1 foot in theory and 1 foot in therapy. And she was interested in Dabrowski's approach to psychotherapy. He had written a book in Polish, a 400-page book in Polish. And at her insistence, she sat down with him. He translated the book into English himself. And she took the verbatim notes and she typed it up. And that manuscript, Rankel and Dabrowski and Rankel, is sitting there waiting to go. And so that's a very important contribution. As well,
Can we publish it?
Pardon me?
Can you publish it?
Well, we're going to look at that. We've been looking at that for how to do that. The other thing is that Dabrowski, I believe it's fair to say, was notoriously hard to pin down. And she sat down with him, Leo Moss, and Marlene introduced Dabrowski, and produced a 200-page manuscript of interview questions. And that's a very important manuscript for the future as well. The other thing I'd say is that Marlene was very important in my life, and she was my friend. I'm very sad with her health issues. Just for 1 second, I have to say this. My mother was in the hospital in Red Deer, and she was close to death. And I spoke to Marlene at noon on a Thursday, and I told her, I said, you know, Marlene, my mom's not going to make it. And we had a nice conversation, and she was supportive, and hung up the phone. And I didn't know that she called Leo Moss. Marlene was not a very good driver, so she called Leo Moss, and at 5 o'clock, the two of them walked into the hospital in Red Deer and said, we're going out for dinner. And we had a very, it helped me relieve my tension. And the next morning, my mom died. So that was Marlene.
Thank you. Someone had a question. Yes,
I have two comments,
okay.
A and B. I'm going to structure the thing so everybody can follow what I'm trying to say. The A comment is about this paper and the accusation that if you have overexcitabilities, you automatically have higher values, which is never, as far as I understand what Dabrowski was saying, because overexcitability is factor one. You've got two other factors to contend with, and I think that you people, the key people in TPD, should make that point in the paper, and I suggest that there should be another sub-component to that paper, which says that for practitioners, it could be the plea of practitioners who are dealing with gifted people on a daily basis. These overexcitabilities do make a difference, despite the fact that they might not be the constructs we wish to have around them. So I would like to encourage you people, and I would like to participate if you want me to raise to the occasion and say, this is, you know, it's in fact defending this concept. There's three factors. We're not only becoming angels because we have one factor that kind of, you know, kind of fits, right? So anyway, that's comment A. And comment B, I'd like to go back to the proposal of looking at different groups that in Dabrowski proposal to investigate different groups, and I saw that one of the groups were the psychoneurotics in there, and for some of you that were at my presentation yesterday, you would know about the highly sensitive person. At the time when Dabrowski made these hypotheses, there wasn't a concept of highly sensitive person, which we now have as a psychometric group, and we know they're not necessarily neurotic. So if anyone goes on and researches those different groups that you were mentioning, I would suggest that maybe the highly sensitive person scale could be used, and then we could measure neurotism as a, you know, as a separate factor to being highly sensitive. Because it looks like now history has taught us something that maybe psychoneurotics is not a homogeneous group. Okay, so anyway, that was funny.
Do it.
Yeah, I have a question. Are there certain groups that we need to be careful of when we start advocating TPD? Because I'm in right now just beginning to start proposing some ideas I have to write articles. Should I be aware that there are certain people and certain publications that are going to react negatively?
You know, I really don't think that you need to be concerned at all, because if you're approaching things in a straightforward kind of way, and you're following basic good principles, then, you know, that's what counts.
That's right.
And so, you know, this idea that you have to be afraid of anything, I think is the wrong way to even begin to approach it. There are going to be people that will disagree with you. Some people disagree by way of measuring residential segregation, but so what? It doesn't make any difference. That's part of the dialogue. You're not here to sell a vacuum cleaner. You're here to get involved in an intellectual discussion. If you have something intellectual to offer, get out there and do it.
It's also part of the third factor. It's also part of the factor.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to make this comment. I need to disavow my connection to Westmount because I'm not sure I'll get out of the room alive. But one of the things that I come to this as a parent. That's my only interest in this, and supporting my child at Westmount, who's in grade 2. I'm a neophyte to the theory. My background is business and specifically in marketing. And so I look at the conversation that's happening in the room right now and find it kind of fascinating, because I think there's life-changing information that's in the room, and knowledge and experience. But I look at everybody trying to figure out how do we get this out there, and all the conversation is about the people that are in the theory and that are in the industry. And I would challenge you to think a little differently, that for every one of an educator or an academic, there's 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 parents out there to each one. So when you're trying to create a movement and you're trying to change, change the world, you don't do it by focusing on the individuals. You focus on the mass, who then move the influencers from within. So put a different way, you need to make this more accessible to parents, because I have to tell you, I've learned a little bit here, but very little. Now I understand the Congress is not intended for parents, but I only mention this, that this is the only opportunity that parents have to even understand what this theory is at this stage. So if the Congress continues, or maybe there's an evolution of it, my challenge would be create a track for parents that can understand what the hell you're talking about. And I would have been in Westmount had it existed 40 years ago as a child. So I think I can follow a little better because I can connect with some of the theory. But I think that's the challenge that the movement has. It's not, people attacking. It's that you've got to make it more accessible so people understand it and can embrace it. And I also would connect with the thought that you've got to start coming from the heart, because most of what I've heard, 95% of what I've heard this weekend has been all theoretical, all academic, all intellectual. And at the end of the day, the way you have to connect to people is with their child, at least as the gifted element of this. And I recognize this Congress is much larger than just giftedness and kids. But if you want to change the world, back to Gandhi's statement, that's where you start. So
I really appreciate your comment. My friend and colleague, Catherine Zakoyan, rode with me here on the plane and said, I want to start a Dabrowski study group for parents in Boulder. Yannicka, you've been invited to start a parent discussion group for parents at Westmount, because obviously there's a need. If any of you can work with parents, I think this is the best advice we've heard.
I just want to echo that because I'm a parent here. And I didn't know about this conference until I had a conversation with Linda in the fall. But I had read about overexcitabilities, but she kind of opened the door and said, hey, why don't you go? It's in your hometown. But I feel like I'm an advocate with all of the other parents, with the literature that I've read and been exposed to. And this is a bit much for just a parent, but it's a start, like the door is open, and I feel like I'm taking this on personally, but it would be nice to have the support of more of a bigger community, because I think there's a need for it and there's a want amongst even locally here that I know of. I just wanted to echo.
Well, we have obviously a rich community in Calgary. I mean, I look at, I'm grateful to know Yannicka and Joe and Hal, because I've been involved in the school. And so, the one thing that I did want to say is that the thing that really humbles me is the passion that people have in the room for the theory and for, the evolution and to get the message out there. And so don't lose sight of the passion. But I think the execution and the tools that you use to do it need to start to be a little thought a little differently.
Absolutely, and we have been using the overexcitability inventory at the Gifted Development Center with all the children who've come in and I think parents learn a great deal. Nancy Miller is one of our testers, and she goes over what those overexcitabilities mean to the parents, which means sometimes much more to them than any of the other information that they're receiving.
I'd like to make a comment about this, and I would like to suggest that we think about this as a both and instead of an either or. I think those of us who come to this come at some point to recognize that both we are the one, but we are the many. And so we come at it together. And so when you were talking about cherishing before and cherishing the other, I think it really starts with us, and back to Bill's comment about the heart, that we cherish ourselves. And so that we have to look to ourselves first and understand how we cherish ourselves. And then after we are doing that work, then we can take our work into the world and make this a bigger part of the world.
And Sal, you talked about the importance of self-acceptance.
Yes.
I think that's critical. I think that's absolutely critical.
I want to give one small comment.
Yeah.
The attack, I read this article,
but they attack not theory of positive disintegration as a whole. They attacked only one concept, this over-excitability. But they don't understand how complex, how beautiful is the theory. When I was reading this, I'm a theoretician, a physicist, and I saw the complexity science in this theory. And this transition is exactly what we are talking about, bifurcation point, shifting from one attractor to another, using different language, but I saw wholeness, this beautiful theory. This is why I attracted to this. I published my articles, Theory of Positive Disintegration, in completely different journals. Journals for physicists, for mathematicians, for complexity science people, and they accepted this approach, connection between psychology and complexity science.
I have a couple of comments. One is on the procedure. I think it's absolutely not only essential that there's criticism within those interested in theory, but it's inevitable. The question is the criticism done in a way that's civil, and it should be done in a way that's civil, and it should be done with the goal of arriving at a better understanding. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk or mention was that very early on in your presentation, you mentioned high IQ and overexcitability going together. They don't always go together, as you know so well. Whether there is a correlation, that's an empirical question, and I guess yet to be determined. But in fact, there are cases where people with very low overexcitability might have very high intelligence, and that intelligence will now be in the service of very self-centered goals. Okay? But that's something you know already. You know all of that, but it's just to clarify. Yeah.
We are now 11 minutes over time. I'm going to steal too much more time for the next session. I'm sure this conversation could have gone on for much longer. Greg, we're going to use you as our poster parent for Westmount. Thank you. Don't forget, at the end of the day, 3 o'clock, we're going to have all of our signature, keynote, one-on-one presenters at their last talk. And I'm sure we're going to get some pretty profound things that come.